afternoon from Newstalk and Gardener on the Pat Kenny Show. I'm just finished with Pat, and we were chatting about Food Fest, which is the theme here at Newstalk, talking about fruit and vegetables and what you can grow in your own garden at the moment. And I was talking to Pat particularly about spinach. So this is a spinach plant that is available in garden centres at the moment. You can plant it directly out into your garden soil, and it will give regular pickings that you can take every week or every 10 days right through until probably May or June of next year. So there's lots of really good winter vegetables, autumn, winter and vegetables that you can plant at this time of year. Things like leeks, winter onions, winter carrots, peas, broad beans, winter cabbages and spring cabbages, things like Brussels sprouts and cauliflower. You'll find those available in your local garden centre at the moment as strong plants like these that were sown several weeks ago, and you plant them directly out into your garden soil. I also mentioned with Pat that you can also sow the seed of plants. So again, vegetables and herbs and salad crops can be sown from seeds at this time of year. So again, lots of the carrots that I mentioned can be sown now. Spring cabbage can be sown from seed at this time of year. Things like the wheatgrass that we use for juicing, that can be sown from seed indoors at this time of year. So it's an ideal time to sow vegetables, herbs and salads. It's also a really good time for planting fruit in the garden. So again, if you're interested in growing blueberries or raspberries or tayberries or apples, pears or plums, again, this is a fantastic time to plant them in your garden. Soil conditions are absolutely superb. The other thing I mentioned with Pat, we're coming into autumn. It's hard to believe, but we're planning for spring colour at this time of year, both winter and spring colour. And I brought into studio a selection of spring flowering bulbs. So varieties of tulips. I thought this one was particularly nice. It's one called Dream Touch. It's a double tulip with two different colours in the flower, both pink and white, and it makes a beautiful cut flower. But also there are lots of bulbs that are brilliant for bees and pollinating insects, and one of the best are actually the crocuses. So this is one called Goldilocks. It's a bright yellow variety, and crocuses planted at this time of the year will come into flower in February and March, a brilliant time when the bees are coming out to forage on and looking for pollen, and crocus in particular and snowdrops are really good for bees early in the spring. Also, if for those of you that went to bloom this year, you'd have seen the beautiful alliums. These are in the onion family, again a great bee plant. But also if you plant them at this time of year, you'll have superb colour in May and June of next year. So this is the time for planting the alliums. I mentioned to Pat that the bulbs are actually foolproof. If you plant a bulb upside down, it'll still grow and flower for you. So it's brilliant to get the children involved in. And this is a tulip, a 3-year-old tulip. So you plant that in the soil, it'll come into flower next April. And spring flowering bulbs are brilliant to get children involved in gardening. You can simply pot them up into pots, grow them on, and they give you tons of colour over the winter and spring. And just finally, I mentioned wildflowers, and again, this is the time of year for adding a bit of wildflower colour to your garden. So again, most of the wildflowers are excellent for bees in particular in your garden, but the weather conditions and the soil conditions are superb for sowing wildflowers. We'll go to your questions.
So this one comes in from Rosie. So, hi Pat, can you please ask Paraic if I can propagate New Zealand palm, the type with the small trunk?
Okay, so New Zealand palm is the cordyline, and it's normally propagated by seed. So again, if you pop into your local garden centre, they may have a couple of packs of cordyline seed, or you'll be able to get it online. Or mature cordylines will often produce seed themselves. So if you've got the New Zealand palms in your garden and you want to propagate them from seed, then this is a really good time for sowing the seed of New Zealand palm. I would normally sow it in seed trays and compost, moist compost. Press the seed in. They're quite large, they're easy to sow, and covered with cling film. And within 6 or 8 weeks, the seeds will germinate on your windowsill. And once they're about 3 or 4 or 5 inches high, once the plants are quite strong, you can plant them into small pots, keep them in a tunnel or greenhouse, or indeed plant them out into the garden soil. So this is a really good time of year for sowing the seeds of New Zealand palm, but it's also a really good time of year for sowing lots of other seeds like wallflowers and sweet williams and many of the plants that you want to flower next spring and summer.
Okay, so somebody said there's far more wasps in my garden this summer. There doesn't seem to be a hive or anything, but do you have any suggestions as to why that might be?
Okay. Well, wasps always get a bad name at this time of year. Remember that wasps are the gardener's friend, because the wasp is a carnivore. it actually eats meat. So what it eats is all the aphids, the green fly, the caterpillars, the black fly, the white fly that have been in your garden on your lupins and on your roses right through the summer months. Because they're diminishing now, there's very little bugs around, the wasps are coming closer to your home looking for some sugary treats. So they're looking for apples, or they're looking for jam, or they're looking for something with that sugar content. And wasps will start to die out as once we get to the end of September, early October, once it gets a bit frosty. But do remember that the wasps do a lot of good in the garden as well. They tend to make a nest in a shrub. It's like a small rugby ball, a paper mache mesh. Sometimes it's not visible. It can be covered with the leaves or whatever that could create in a hedge as well. Really, my advice, if you want to get rid of them, is maybe to put some traps outside. So you can simply do those with jam jars and a little bit of jam to catch the wasps. Or again, in your local garden centre, you can get some a wasp spray or wasp powder, which will again control wasps in around the home. But remember, they are the gardener's friend, so if you can put up with them, they will die off naturally at the end of September. And but if you need to control them, then certainly pop into your local garden centre. They'll have some wasp powder or wasp spray to control them. Or you can do it organically with just the wasp traps, a little bit of water, a little bit of jam in a jam jar, and that will collect them as well.
Okay, so the final question is there any hay fever friendly plants at the moment?
Well, generally plants that produce large double flowers. So what's happening with the hay fever is that you're ingesting the pollen. It's the pollen grains that plants release that creates hay fever. So if you pick plants that have double flowers, so large, big double flowers, so things like hydrangeas don't produce any pollen. So therefore in the garden that you don't suffer from hay fever from the large double flowering plants. So roses that have really big blousy flowers, peony roses that produce big blousy flowers. Those that are single flowering are brilliant for the bees, but they also create pollen as well, and that's what attributes to hay fever. What I find myself is that if you eat local honey, so I eat Westport honey because I come from Mayo, and I eat it on a daily basis nearly, because honey contains the natural pollen and nectar from the local flowers. And if you ingest that and eat that on a regular basis, you build up an immune system to local pollen. So my advice, don't take supermarket honey, because that comes in from other parts of Europe and outside Europe. Go for local Irish honey that's produced in your locality. It'll be full of the natural pollens. Eat it on a regular basis, particularly over the winter period, and that helps to build up your own immune system to the local pollen that surrounds us. So if you want to plant your garden with pollen-free plants, you're looking for the big blousy plants like hydrangeas, double flowering roses, peony roses, those plants that are sterile and don't produce any pollen. But look, there's a lot of grasses and trees that produce natural pollen anyway. So try the honey. I find it very effective, and I'm working with plants all year round. We have one more.
Yeah, this is from Danny. So how do I get rid of mushrooms growing in our garden? We're living in the countryside.
Okay, well, good for you, Danny. And this is the time of year for mushrooms, particularly when we get this humid weather. So when you get moisture and heat at the same time, you get a natural production of mushrooms. Remember, they don't do any harm. They're a fungi. They're feeding on the dead matter that's in your soil. So if you've got old roots of plants or an old hedge or maybe an old tree in the garden, you often get toadstools or little mushrooms growing along those roots, particularly if the roots are decaying. So there's no real need to get rid of them. If visually or aesthetically you want to remove them, then a little bit of sulphate of iron. If you get a little bit of sulphate of iron, particularly if the mushrooms are on your lawn, sprinkle that, maybe mix it up in a watering can or a sprayer, apply it to the mushroom area, and that will certainly burn them off and kill them off. But to be honest, I would leave them alone. They're natural fungi in the garden. They do no harm whatsoever, and they'll disappear within 2 or 3 weeks anyway, so they're very short-lived. So maybe put up with them, enjoy them, show the kids them. Most mushrooms are perfectly safe, and they're just a natural fungi that's feeding on dying matter within your own soil. But if you do need to get rid of them, then my advice is to get a little bit of sulphate of iron. You'll get that in your local garden centre. Mix it up, apply it to the area, and that'll kill them overnight, and they'll disappear. And you'll tend to find that in that area, mushrooms will appear every August, September, particularly in this mild, humid weather. So that's it from me. You can get more information on horkans.ie, and I'm back with Pat in 2 weeks' time. See you now.